You're listening to Sharky on sharkgoeschomp. 5 terrifying real monster attacks, even more from the web. Submitted by Nolan Moore. Henry Van Heerden and the Santu Sakai. The Santu Sakai of Malaysia are half-human, half-animal creatures with a nasty habit of raiding villages and carrying people off as midnight snacks. Their name translates to mouthmen, probably because they have butcher knife fangs and a penchant for eating humans. Of course, most people don't believe in the Santu Sakai. They sound like a bad dream that you've had after eating spicy food while watching Beowulf. But Henry Van Heerden would disagree. In 1967, he was hunting in a forest near Kuala Lumpur when he heard growling and screaming coming from the trees. As a hunter, Van Heerden was used to such noises, but these unnerved him and he ran. As he ran, Van Heerden looked back to see 2 gruesome ogres barreling straight at him. They were big, blocky, and armed with very sharp teeth. Van Heerden decided to shoot them down, but before he could aim his shotgun, the Santu Sakai were all over him, knocking his weapon away. Desperate, Van Heerden clubbed the beast with a rock and staggered into his car. As he fumbled with the keys, one demon tried smashing through the rear window, while the other mounted the hood. Finally, Van Heerden got the motor running and ditched Thing 1, but Thing 2 was still battering the windshield. So Van Heerden hit the brakes, sending the monster sprawling. Then he sped down towards civilization, leaving the mouthmen to choke in his dust. The story of Edward Brian McCleary. Purchase a copy of the May 1965 issue of Fate magazine, and you'll find a chilling story titled My Escape from a Sea Monster by Edward Brian McCleary. McCleary was just 19 when he and his 4 teenage friends, Warren Sally, Eric Rooley, Larry Bill, and Brad Rice, said they were attacked by a prehistoric beast. On March 24, 1962, the 5 friends decided to check out the USS Massachusetts. The Navy had sunk the decommissioned ship off of the coast of Pensacola, Florida, and the boys thought it would be the perfect place to scuba dive. Adventurous teenagers, creepy location, evil monster, you see where this is going. As the boys sailed toward the battleship in a rubber raft, they hit a fierce storm. After being tossed around by strong winds, they found themselves lost in the fog. While they didn't run across any undead pirates, they did find something worse. As the sun sank, the boys heard something splashing nearby. It was then that they smelled the stench of rot and heard something hissing. McCleary claims that the monster that they then saw was something like a 3-meter or 10-foot pole, or a very long neck coming straight at them. Panicking, the teens ditched their raft and swam for the battleship. But as they paddled, McCleary saw that the monster pull Eric Royal under the water. Then he heard Warren Sally shout, "It's got Brad!" A few minutes later, Sally screamed in pain, and Larry Bill vanished into the fog. McCleary swam to shore, where he was discovered by a rescue crew. 3 years later, he sold his story to the magazine and sketched an image of the beast that supposedly killed his friends. The illustration bears a striking resemblance to that of a plesiosaur. But is there any truth to McCleary's tale? According to the website Cryptomundo, Brad Rice really did wash ashore dead, but the fate of the others remains unclear. La Bruja de Guadalupe. Leonardo Samaniego isn't your typical monster attack victim. Aside from being a police officer, Samaniego didn't encounter the standard 8-man or sea serpent. Instead, Samaniego claims he was attacked by a bruja, Spanish for witch. Officer Samaniego was patrolling the streets of Guadalupe, Mexico on January 16, 2004, when he noticed something jump down from a nearby tree. Curious, Samaniego flicked on his brights to get a better look, and saw a woman clad in a black cape, cloak, and pointy hat. This witch woman had solid black eyes, no moon in there, no eyelids, and most importantly, her feet weren't touching the ground. Without warning, The Bruja soared toward the car, landing on the hood and glaring at Samaniego with her soulless, deep eyes. As the terrified officer threw his car into reverse, the witch pounded on the windshield, trying to break through and grab Samaniego. But Samaniego radioed for backup, but suddenly hit a wall, knocking himself unconscious. Samaniego awoke inside an ambulance and was tested for drugs and alcohol, both of which turned up negative. He passed all psychological tests, and he never had hallucinations before. When reporters arrived, the frightened officer stuck to his story. After his tale went public, hundreds of people reported seeing a woman flying across the sky. Had Samaniego's story sparked mass hysteria? Or did something really attack his cruiser? Now, if you ever visit Guadalupe, maybe you should take a bucket of water just for protection. The Bauman Incident. The uber spooky tale of Bauman the Mountain Man was transcribed by none other than Teddy Roosevelt himself. The story comes from Roosevelt's 1892 book, The Wilderness Hunter, and Bauman's tale is as creepy as they come. Bauman and his partner were beaver trappers who set up camp and built a lean-to near Montana's Wisdom River. Leaving their bags behind, they went to set traps, returning at nightfall. But when they came back, they found something had torn down their shelter and emptied their packs. Bauman assumed it had been a bear, but his partner was uneasy. Using a torch, he carefully inspected the tracks. "Bauman," his partner said, "that bear had been walking on 2 legs." That night, as they slept in a newly built lean-to, Bauman awoke to see a giant standing in the opening. He panicked and shot the intruder, which then took off into the forest. Now for the rest of the night, the 2 men sat by the fire, cradling their guns, watching the trees. The creature returned the next day, racking their campsite again while they were trapping. And that night, the men heard the beast howling in the woods. When the sun rose, Bauman and his friend decided it was time to pack up and go. But first, they had to collect their traps. And they made the all-time classic mistake. They split up. Bauman went to the river, while his partner stayed to pack their gear. When Bauman returned to the camp, he noticed their fire had gone out. All their belongings were packed, but where was his partner? Bauman called for him, but there was no answer. And then he saw the body. His partner was sprawled on the ground, his neck broken, his throat covered with puncture wounds. There were giant footprints everywhere. Terrified, Bauman took off running through the forest, leaving behind everything except his gun. So what was the creature? Bauman believed it was a goblin. Modern cryptozoologists think it was Bigfoot. But Roosevelt was undecided. Perhaps it was just an animal. But then again, perhaps not. As he put it, no man can say. The Fred Beck Story. Near Mount St. Helens is a narrow gorge called Abe Canyon, and if Fred Beck is telling the truth, its inhabitants don't care for visitors. In 1924, Beck and 4 friends were mining for gold near the canyon when weird things started happening. For a week, they'd been hearing strange noises, whistling, and loud booms, like something beating its chest. One day, when Beck and a buddy went to fetch water, they saw a hairy hominoid step out of the woods. Perhaps it just wanted to say hi, but Beck's friend panicked and shot at the creature, driving it into the canyon. Naturally, the miners were spooked and planned to leave the following morning. The Bigfoot had other plans. That night, the miners were sleeping when something crashed against their cabin. Beck jumped out of the bed and heard things, very big things, running around outside. As the cabin had no windows, one of the miners peered through a gap in the logs and saw at least 3 monsters plotting an attack. The monsters began hurling rocks at the cabin, and they pushed against the door, climbed onto the roof, looked for an entrance. The miners began shooting back, firing through the roof and through the gaps in the logs. The attack continued through the night, with the creatures pummeling the cabin. One of the miners was so afraid that he sang in hopes of appeasing the mountain devils, but when the sun rose, the beast melted into the forest. The miners quickly packed and then bolted out the door toward their car. After the miners made it to safety, they told their wild story to several newspapers. When reporters investigated the site, they found mysterious footprints, but no Bigfoot, not even dead ones. Obviously, most believed the story was a hoax, and one man even took credit. In 1982, a man named Rant Mullins claimed that not only had been faking Bigfoot tracks since the 30s, but that he'd rolled rocks onto Fred Beck's cabin that night in 1924. So the whole thing was possibly just a twisted prank, but this author still won't ever spend a night near Ape Canyon. This is Sharky with sharkgoeschomp. I hope that you enjoyed this story. Please subscribe for even more stories. And let me know in the comments if you had any encounters with a group of monsters in the forest, sea monsters, witches, or maybe just heard things bump in the night outside. Have a good night.